Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I'm here to continue my David H. Keller series in this video with his second story. I've really only done two other David H. Keller videos, and only one of them was going back to the beginning, Revolt of the Pedestrians, which I found that to be an absolutely amazing story. And so this is number two, published 2 months later in April of 1928, titled The Yeast Men. And this again really, really blew my mind. I went into it with certain expectations, and none of my expectations were met. But that's a good thing. Let me explain. This was published in the April 1928 issue of Amazing Stories. And I was expecting the Yeast Men to be a typical Amazing Stories science fiction story about some mad scientist trying to take over the world and creating this army of men made of yeast that, you cut them and they just blob into more. And of course, some steel-jawed hero saves the day and finds a way to turn all the yeast men into beer or something. I mean, I was expecting your typical mad scientist story, or maybe aliens that were all made of yeast, or some kind of weird tales horror story of yeast creatures coming out of the swamp or something like that. That's what I went into it with. That's not what I got. Okay. What the Eastman is about. First of all, before I say anything, it's been a long time, and this term isn't really used much anymore. But you need to know that the story was published in 1928, so it was pretty contemporary to this in World War I. And actually, I found out with a little bit of online research before World War I, American infantrymen were called doughboys. I've heard this term before. Okay, I knew that. My quick internet research didn't come up with an origin for that, although it's suspected it. There's apparently some accounts that it may date all the way back to the Civil War. And it's suspected that the name comes from the idea of the infantrymen tramping through fields and stuff, kicking up dirt and getting this dirt over them, which makes them look like they're covered with flour, the way yeast is covered with flour when you're kneading it before you bake it. And so they were called doughboys. All right. And so the Pillsbury Doughboy is something completely different, but it does draw upon that popular term from World War I and possibly before. Okay, so doughboys are U.S. infantry foot soldiers. Okay, so in the story, you have this kingdom of Eupenia, which I'm sure is made up, and a smaller kingdom of Maronia, which Maronia is kind of a kingdom in a small area of mountains inside of Eupenia. So Eupenia is all around it. And the premier of Eupenia doesn't like the Maronians, and he wants to just slaughter them all. And he gets his advisors together, and they're going to go into Maronia, and they're going to declare war on October 1st, and they're going to go in and just kill everyone. Seriously, he wants to commit genocide against the kingdom of Maronia. That's how evil this premier is. Well, there's one guy who decides he doesn't like this, and he doesn't like this premier, and he wants to stop them. And his wife happens to be from Maronia, so he escapes and goes to Maronia and warns them. So Maronia's worried about this because they're just not big enough, they're not powerful enough to stop them. They're going to exist no more. If this happens, they know they're going to lose. But there's a scientist actually an American scientist that happens to be living in Maronia. And he goes to the king of Maronia and says, well, I've got this weapon that I just developed. What it does is it creates yeast men. It can take a tiny bit of yeast, shoot it out. When it lands, it starts to expand, and it'll expand into the rough form of a man. The yeast has been treated with radium somehow to make it do this. It turns into the rough form of a man, and it starts walking in a straight line. And it'll keep walking for 3 days in a straight line, and then it will start to um, decay. And then at that point, it quickly dissolves into this pool of slime, about 30 pounds of slime on the ground, which has a stench which causes the most iron stomached man to just start throwing up uncontrollably. So he proposes shooting billions of these yeast men into Eupenia and letting them walk around and decay and just force all the Eupenians to pass out from the smell. Um, I'm not doing justice to this story. It's hilarious. And of course, if you haven't caught on yet, Yeastmen, Doughboys, and Keller even makes the comment that these Yeastmen, one of his characters makes the comment that these Yeastmen are just as intelligent and useful as an infantryman. So I don't think Keller was a big fan of the U.S. military. Anyway, um, I don't know if Keller really intended this to be so funny, but it is hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious. I just read this morning, and I was laughing very much through the whole thing. It's told straight faced, but it's it's hilarious. It's funny. It's great. It's brilliant. It's so good. I mean, humor is hard to do. And this one is just so well done. And like I say, I can't even be 100% sure that he intended the humor, but I think he did. Um, it's genius. This story is really genius. So, two in a row now, top tales for David H. Keller. His first two stories, and both of them are getting top tales from me because they both just blew my mind. They weren't what I expected. They were way more sophisticated than what I was expecting from amazing stories in the 1920s. And they were well written, delightful stories. Um, and aside from the fact that the term doughboy is kind of getting lost to history now, aside from that, there's nothing about this story that is dated in any way. It's just hilarious. The only joke, and maybe this is because I live in Wisconsin, the only joke that wasn't used in this story that I feel slighted by the fact of its neglect is the fact that the Upenians did not ever think about using this yeast to make beer. All these yeast men walking into the country to make beer, they could have been totally smashed off of all this yeast that Maronia was sending into their country. And they missed the boat there. But that's, like I say, I'm from Wisconsin, beer state, drunkest state in the union. I don't drink much, but I'm surrounded by it. So that's the way we think here. Anyway, I hardly recommend the Yeast Men. It's available in a lot of places, mostly used. I have a copy of the Neville Spearman edition of Tales from Underwood. This was originally published by Arkham House. My copy is not Arkham House, it's the later Neville Spearman edition, which of course is newer and it's still a used book, but it's cheaper. Okay. You see a copy of this, it'll cost you a lot less than the Arkham House edition will. The story is also in a book called The Keller Memento, which I have. It's a hardcover book from a place called Ramble House, which is, you can contact them online and order that book brand new. I did. I've got a copy of The Keller Memento. Excellent book, lots of Keller stories in it. And I'm looking forward to going through more of this. And as I said in another recent video, I want to try and coordinate these author deep dives with the magazines, because now this is 1928. It's not too far ahead from where I'm at with going through the magazines. I decided to go back to the beginning of the magazines with the first issue of Weird Tales in 1923 and talk. I want to read through them and talk about them, but I want to pull out the stories by authors that I'm doing deep dives of, as well as pull out stories that are serials and pull out any stories that just seem really significant and that I need to talk more about. And so if I put the brakes on my Keller deep dive for just a little bit, I should get caught up. Because there's just a couple of years of Weird Tales, and then I get into the beginnings of Amazing Stories in 1926, a couple of years of Weird Tales and Amazing, and I'll be up to the Yeast Men in April of 1928. And so then I can move on. And Keller's next one, A Biological Experiment, is from June of 1928, Amazing Stories. And I can get to that and talk about it in conjunction with the June 1928 Amazing Stories. And so, I'll be, if I do it that way, I'm very quickly going to be getting going once again on David H. Keller, Edmund Hamilton, H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard. Um, I mentioned Edmund Hamilton. Who am I missing? Jack Williamson. Jack Williamson is from that time. John W. Campbell Jr., I'll be getting back to him when I get up to 1930. There's a lot of pieces that are going to fall into place very quickly if I do it that way. And so then, more recent authors are going to suffer, but from looking at my analytics, it's stuff like this David H. Keller story. That's what you guys want from me. That's what you guys are liking in my channel. And there's lots of other people doing the more recent stuff anyway. So, when I do videos with Emily, we'll be covering more recent works. For 2025, I said we're going to split it because she's been letting me pick pretty much everything for the last couple of years. And I said, well, that's not fair to you. And so for the last 6 months, she has been choosing the books, the novels that we read together each month, one a month. And in 2025, we're going to switch off months. So first one of 2025 is The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard. That's my pick. That's January. February is going to be one of Emily's picks. And then I have March, Emily has April, etc. Emily gets October, which I'm jealous of. But I set it up that way, so oh well. Um, those videos are going to be kind of exempt from this plan of mine, but otherwise I'm going to try and stick to this plan. I'm going to try to cover a lot more of the early stuff, as well as going back before Weird Tales with authors like Edgar Rice Burroughs, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Edgar Allan Poe, William Hope Hodgson, Algernon Blackwood, Arthur Machen, Bram Stoker. Um, Lots more of them missing. Abraham Merritt, all the pre-magazine authors that wrote science fiction, fantasy, or horror. I'm going to try and dive into them and do more of them. So we're kind of getting back to what Emily and I originally talked about with Telltale, to do those really old lost classics. and focus mostly on that. And there are other people starting to talk about some of that stuff, but still not enough. I haven't seen a really good video on the worm Ouroboros yet. Let's get it out there, guys. Let's read that. Let's do. That's an amazing book. Let's get that one done. I don't see anybody talking about King Solomon's Mines or She by H. Rider Haggard. I don't see anybody talking about anything by Abraham Merritt. Let's get it out there. I would love to see others doing the same stuff that I'm doing, but it's not happening. Telltale Books is still the only place that has been talking about those, and we've kind of gotten away from that and been talking about more recent stuff. So I want to get us back to our roots and talk about more of that older stuff that other channels just aren't covering. So, next, David H. Keller, A Biological Experiment. Probably going to put the brakes on and put that in the back burner for a little bit till I get up to the June 1928 issue of Amazing. And then I will do a video just on the David H. Keller story if it's worth it. You know, some stories are just, and you've seen this in some of my videos, they're just not much of a story. It's a short. It's kind of a fun idea, but there just isn't that much to it. I can't really talk about it without spoiling it. It's just not that much of a story. And then the first two issues of Weird Tales, probably 90% of both issues was stuff that just wasn't all that good. You know, they were enjoyable, but didn't find anything really exciting to talk about. Ooze in the first issue of Weird Tales, but there were a lot of short stories in the first issue that just weren't that spectacular, weren't much to really talk about. And there may be some, there may be some stuff by these other authors that I'm doing deep dives of like that. And so then maybe I'll just cover some of those when I cover the magazines and not split them out as a separate story. We'll see. Take it story by story. If it's worth a video, I'll do a video just on the one story and break it out from the magazine. If I don't think it's worth it, I'll just cover it with the rest of the magazine and move on. I think that's a good plan. I hope you'll like that. I hope you'll come back for more of all of what I do on Telltale Books. And till then, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and make sure that you see everything coming up.